coming out to my friends. I always thought they're going to like reject me and they're going to like toss me away and whatnot. When I came out to my friend group, a lot of them already knew because I came out to them previously while I was drunk and I didn't remember. And I just didn't know. And I was still scared. Something that I wish I would have done sooner was watch trans creators. Like actual like trans creators. And I think I would have, like my egg would have cracked sooner and I would have gotten over the part where I was like so ashamed of like being trans. So when it comes to like content creation, a lot of the things that I'm trying to do is basically fill the spot, the hole of like content creators that I wish I would have had, you know, just consumed back in the day when I was like trying to figure myself out. And also a huge thing that I had, which is also like why I was like repressing and struggling so much to come to terms with the fact that I was trans, was like I grew up during like the start of like the anti-SJW woke nonsense era, right? It's like Jordan Peterson owns woke feminist, liberal, and whatnot, where a lot of the things are controlled through optics and you don't actually listen to like the substance because, you know, someone who's screaming, some triggered snowflake. I was deeply ashamed of being trans because like I wanted to be like one of the good trans people. I wanted to be like somebody who's like, I don't care about like being misgendered. I don't care about like my pronouns. I don't demand that someone like respects me as a woman because like I'm not a real woman, right? It forced me like deep into the closet and made it incredibly difficult for me to also like talk about the fact that I'm trans, right? Because I didn't want to be viewed as, you know, how I perceived trans people because of the media that I consumed. It's basically like if you're a furry and you don't want to talk about being a furry because the media is like hyper fixating on like, you know, the furries that are just, you know, gross and, you know, like some of them are like zoophiles and, you know, they're just like weird and freaky and so on, and you don't want to be like associated with that. That's kind of like how, you know, like trans people were like portrayed, and I didn't want to be like one of them, right? And I strongly believe that if I would have watched like actual trans creators instead of getting like my news source and like the optics of like, you know, the trans community from like some right wing or somebody who like portrays themselves as like apolitical and whatnot, like the Asmongold type of like streams, and I would have actually watched like trans creators and have them talk about like their own struggles, then I would have come to terms with the fact that I'm trans way sooner. I would have also like had the resources and like communities, like the spaces where I could have, you know, explored my gender identity and like been myself. Because the thing is like, I always was like under the impression like, oh, I can't call myself a woman. I can't come out because like I look too much like a man, right? I haven't started HIT. I'm like socially, I look like a standard regular ass man, and I don't fulfill like the stereotype of like what a woman have to look like. So I can't like come out as trans and like a trans woman because like nobody ever like would gender me correctly anyway. So like, what's the point? What's the point of like starting to like transition? I think having other people like talk about their experience, their struggles, and having people you can like resonate with and people who, you know, maybe are like further in like the transitioning process and they've been like through this stage, it would be beneficial. And that's kind of like why at the start of like, you know, me making content and so on, I shared a lot of the things. Like I didn't have voice training. I shared every single step of the process back in the day. And now I'm making like my rants about like being trans, being part of the VTuber community and transphobia that forced me to like repress all the influences that I used to consume, like the type of influences that I used to consume are now saying that like I'm harming the trans community because like I am too vocal, I am too visible. And there are way too many trans people who are like falling for this stuff, right? Like I talked about that. But like I'm trying to like fill this hole, this like gap when it comes to like content creators And I'm trying to like produce the things that I wish that I consumed when I was like trying to figure myself out. I'm so glad I found you, Nira. You've been a high note in my life. I'm glad. I'm glad that people can like, you know, discover themselves through like my stories and my experiences and through my like advocacy. Have like someone who is vocal about, you know, their struggles. Especially when it comes to like trans kids. Obviously my streams are like 18 plus. You know, we do have like some sexual themes every now and then and like some lewd jokes and so on. But like my content on YouTube generally, I'm trying to be as like friendly as possible and just like talk about like all of these things, because I think the most vulnerable like groups of people are just trans kids, and they are the ones who, you know, deserve to be heard, whose struggles need to be like amplified and so on. I don't want to just like dismiss trans kids because it's poor optics, right? Me talking about like trans struggles and whatnot, that is portraying me as a groomer, because like, why am I obsessed with children? Why do I want trans kids to live who are like the most vulnerable and like, you know, prone to like end their lives and so on, because of like the bullying, like constant harassment and so on. Me talking about this, me defending the fact that like trans kids exist and they deserve to be heard, is actually making the trans community look bad. Why do I do this? In my group that I run, the other trans individuals to help people that desire to come out as trans, building a supportive environment is very important. That's true. Having a space where you can talk with other like trans people, especially people like in your same country and like area and so on, is like greatly beneficial. Also having people that are like further in the process and they have like all of the mistakes, you know, during like the transitioning stage that they made, to have like a point where they can like share this, so you don't have to go through the same like frustrating process of like getting HRT and transitioning and so on, like coming out. Right? Like, I never knew how I should talk about, like, me being trans with my parents, right? I didn't really have, like, the words, and it took a while. My representation of, like, you know, trans people back then were, like, referring to, like, trans people as, like, transsexuals and, like, oh, they're just, like, men in dresses, and coming out, it was, like, incredibly awkward. Like, talking about these things, it's incredibly awkward. Having people who can give you, like, the words to describe how you feel, having somebody, you know, say things that like you resonate with and basically give you words to describe how you feel is incredibly useful. And that's kind of like what I'm trying to do, to just like share all of like the, you know, poor decisions that I made, and also the good moments and whatnot, in order to, you know, help the next generation of trans people, people who are just like trying to figure themselves out, people who are coming to terms with the fact that they're trans and so on. Obviously, I also want to give like a point of like escapism, but being trans is being used as like a scapegoat for like all the big problems in the world and so on. And we're constantly under attack, like from political entities, from like entire governments. So it's difficult to not acknowledge the things that are like going on in the world and like all of the struggles that we are facing, and how like drastically things have gotten worse. But yeah, like a big part of like why I didn't want to come out is because I learned about trans people from like the quote unquote apolitical anti-DEI, anti-woke crowd, instead of like actual trans creators, because like that's what's being boosted in the algorithm, right? You don't see like trans creators like me in the algorithm. You know, you see someone like Asmongo talking about like trans people like me, and then you are like somebody who is trans or, you know, resonates with it, and then they see their favorite creator, like a big creator, tell them that like, oh, you're the reason why trans people are getting like punished by the you know, cruel Trump admin and so on, because like I keep talking about like the existence of trans kids because I was one. And then you're like, because of this person I can't come out to my parents because they are going to think that I was groomed into it, or I'm a groomer or whatnot. And you're also like constantly, you're stuck in like a weird little echo chamber, you know, you constantly see like articles from like a decade ago resurfacing again and like being repackaged because like, I don't know, they come out as trans or they were like a drag queen or whatnot, and people are just like straight up lying and claiming that somebody is like non-binary even though they're just like doing it to harm like non-binary people even more or something like that, right? And it's like a real struggle when you're so deep in this and when you have like this repression, this like anxiety and so on, and you don't really have like the environment where you can just like be yourself, right? Like for me, for instance, like playing TTRPGs, playing D&D and having like, you know, like a female character, that was already like me stepping out of my comfort zone because I was like so ashamed of like who I am that just like having, you know, some roleplay setting as like a, you know, female character was like a point where I was already like struggling because I learned from like all of these right-wing sources and whatnot that being trans is, you know, just like some sexual deviation and like some fetish and so on. Coming out to my friends, I always thought they're going to like reject me and they're going to like toss me away and whatnot. When I came out to my friend group, a lot of them already knew because I came out to them previously while I was drunk and I didn't remember. And nobody like checked up on this, right? It's like, yeah, I'm revealing like this part, this core thing that I'm like struggling with, and it's just like a nothing burger to everyone and nobody talks about it. And I just didn't know. And I was still scared. At the start of my transition journey, like, yeah, I didn't have voice training. I didn't look like a woman. So like, I can't expect people gendering me correctly. Anytime you came into like a new group where somebody was, you know, supportive of you and using like your pronouns, to basically be forced to come out because like why is my friend calling this random person she when I'm hearing a man's voice? It sucks to be in this like situation, and it made me feel kind of guilty because like I forced people to like switch up and think about their words because like I suddenly came out as trans. First learned of the trans community through a classmate who is trans. She and I are close friends to this day. That's nice. Like yeah, it's really good to talk to other trans people when you like find out you're trans. That is why, you know, people are pointing the finger at me who is like, oh, you're making the trans community look bad. You're harming the trans community by being vocal and shit like that. You know who is actually harming the trans community? You know, people like Blair White. The people who are actually harming the trans community are, you know, trans people who are pushing like trans medicalism, conservative talking points and whatnot to like enrich themselves. Who the fuck is Blair White? A trans woman who transitioned as a kid who is advocating for children to not transition because they don't know their gender. Who's getting platformed by like conservatives and getting boosted and whatnot. Transphobic trans people are fucking embarrassing.
Sage! Sage, heal! Sage! Sage! Thank you.
Sage! Sage heal! Sage heal me, please! I'm flanking, I'm doing my thing. I'm yapping. I kind of forgot what I was like talking about. Transphobic trans people do more harm to the trans community than I could ever do. Because they're actively normalizing these right-wing anti-trans talking points.
Sage!
Thank you.
I just hear someone.
She helped me.